alive. I'm reading out of Return to Elysium. It is a far memory book by Joan Grant as Lucina in 2nd century BC in Greece and in Rome. She grew up in Greece and she traveled to Rome, and she is still in Rome now. She'd fallen in love with Nigellus. We are now at chapter 12 and it's called Idyll. When I left the house to join Nigellus, who had gone ahead to wait for me at the landing stage, I saw Julia reclining on a couch under a purple awning. She was reading but looked up when she heard me. "The sea is a little rough," she said. "I hope you won't get chilled on your last day here, though you Greeks don't mind such minor discomforts." She smiled, the genial hostess concerned with the pleasure of a guest. I could almost hear her saying to herself, "I can well afford to be tolerant. She won't dare to be any further trouble. If it amuses Nigellus to show off his new boat, what does it matter? She will get drenched and look bedraggled as a wet hen when she comes back. What a fool she is not to make a more becoming exit." As I ran down to the beach, she would have been an efficient general, withdrawing her phalanx at the peak of the battle. She returned to her scrutiny of the household tallies. I might have guessed she would not have been reading anything more impersonal. Surely no antagonist has ever been more carelessly dismissed, or with such lack of insight. As I ran down to the beach, I was glad that Euripides had taken Flavia out for the day. I knew she would be happier when she no longer had reason to stay with her mother. But it would have been difficult to watch Nigellus saying farewell to his daughter, and trying desperately to sound casual. The wind filled the sail, and we drew out from the shelter of the cove. We talked very little until we were in the open sea. I was concerned with showing that I knew how to handle a boat, and both of us had too much to say for the words to come easy. The wind refreshened from the east, and I began to wonder if I had prayed too fervently for rough weather. Nigellus knew what I was thinking, for he laughed and shouted, "You had better explain to Poseidon that we don't really want to be drowned." "He knows," I said. "I'm careful to be exact in my prayers. I put my appeal tactfully, so that he should not think we considered him an unwelcome host. I explained we were too concerned with each other to want even a god as third to our company. "I love you, Lucina. I hope Poseidon can hear. I want everyone to hear." A wave broke over the side and sluiced us both in green water. I turned the boat into the wind. I had neglected the course in watching Nigellus. "You look even more beautiful wet," he shouted. "The Nereids are sulking in their caves because they are jealous." "Julia would think I look bedraggled." "Julia? May all the gods be praised. At last I can laugh at Julia." He laughed so much that the veins stood out on his forehead and he had to cling to the mast. "Think of Julia with the ashes of mourning on her head, or will only the slaves wear ashes for me?" Another wave broke over us. "If we don't watch the boat, we shall give her real bodies to bury," I said, and hoped that I concealed that I really meant it. It was dark before we reached the cave on the island, and if the boat had not been drawn into a favourable current, I think we must certainly have been drowned. My teeth were chattering and blood was trickling down my face. I had been too slow to dodge the broom when it swung over in a sudden gust. My tunic was torn and my cloak a sodden heap. The boat was leaking, and we doubted whether it would float long enough to be washed ashore after we set it adrift. The grotto for it was too large for a cave, had a wide ledge above high water mark. Nigellus took the boat into the current and then swam back to me. The water was deep and calm in the grotto, and I could just see him by the trail of phosphorescence. He swam well, but I had to help him up the ledge. He was exhausted and lay with his head on my lap, sucking in gulps of air. "Sorry, I shall be all right in a moment, silly to get tired. I'll start a fire. Where are the things?" "They must be further along the ledge. There should be everything we need until Euripides picks us up. I mean, to get here before dark. I didn't allow for the storm." I felt my way along the ledge and came to a blank wall of rock. "I can't go any further," I said. "Are you sure this is the right ledge?" "This is the only ledge." A magnificent stream of oaths took up the echoes. If only they could have been translated into a different heat, we should have had a blazing fire. I realized there had been a flaw in the plans. The supplies must have been left in the wrong cave. How unlike Euripides to be so careless. He had helped me to select the few clothes I dared bring with me, chosen violet cushions, and even insisted that we must have a mattress. Papples, or the ubiquitous thistle, can be to an ideal as a pin to the ephemeral radiance of a soap bubble, he had said. Lucina diving naked is a treasured image. Lucina shivering in the evening suggests gooseflesh rather than a dance of poplar leaves. So I had agreed to take 2 cloaks and a robe of fine wool, white with a scarlet girdle. There was to have been dry wood here and a jar of oil so that the fire would light at first touch. It was too dark to collect driftwood, even if there had been any. I had seen Nigellus take a small leather bag out of the boat, and by a sudden spurt of flame saw him looking at it disconsolately. He was trying to kindle a few strands of seaweed, but they were too damp to burn. "I brought enough money to buy anything you might want. Now I can't even give you a fire," he said abjectly. Inappropriately I began to laugh. "Dear Nigellus, please don't look so miserable. We wanted an adventure nearly as much as we wanted each other. Now we have both, so why have regrets?" "It's my fault," he said in the tone which is used to indicate that the speaker is entirely without blame. "I should have seen to all the arrangements myself." Euripides seemed confident that he could be trusted with these minor details, and that the slave fully understood his instructions, but one is a fool to rely on foreigners. The words had slipped out and he tried to cover them. "I was referring up to the slave. I bought him in Syracuse. My dear, please be sure that in no way I meant my remark to be foolish as a reflection on Greece. Perhaps this is not quite the time or the place to engage in discussions as to the trivial merits of our countries." Suddenly he seized hold of me. "Forgive me, Lucina. Please don't be angry. Please don't leave me. I will make it up to you. I will never again fail to protect you. I love you so much, Lucina. I love you so much." He was crying. He thought I was going to blame him, to punish him by sending him back to Julia. He was not the lover. He was the child, imploring comfort, desperately afraid that the companion he trusted was going to side with the grown-ups and send him back to loneliness. Hatred for Julia was much stronger than disappointment, a temper for the will which had determined that I would try to give back to Nigellus his lost illusions, and in that giving him some of my own. I am glad that Julia never knew how we passed our first night as lovers, with rock for a pillow, and not even a thought of passion to bring us warmth. Next day I found it a little tiresome to have to search each cave on the island, for until every possibility had proved ineffective, Nigellus remained convinced that somewhere we should find our carefully chosen supplies. At last he decided that a freak wave must have washed over the ledge, and so disorganized his careful plans. Perhaps it was my finer Greek perception which suddenly told me that our situation was not due to any lack of efficiency on the part of Euripides, but to his view that an idyll in the primitive setting would have been flawed by the anachronism of Roman luxury. I should have preferred to share this insight with Nigellus, to cut short this frenzied search, this penetration into caves, which gave no more than a redundance of seaweed or the spares of foundered ships. But how could I deliberately sever the link with the only friend whom I could take with me into this new life? How could I expect a Roman to appreciate such a very special joke? I recognized a little ruefully that the discomforts were easily offset by the recognition that they gave me an opportunity of showing I could be instructor as well as pupil. When Nigellus made love to me, which he did with surprising skill and variety, I was for the first time in my life entirely content to learn. How different can be reality from the most meticulous study of abstractions. As a colleague of Selenius, I was not unversed in the emotional consequences of certain transmutations of vitality. As a priest, I had listened to manifold complexities and given judgment with profundity and extraordinary ignorance. As Lucina, I learned how much I had to learn, and how seldom academic knowledge can outweigh empiricism. But would I have found it so smooth to be compliant unless I could have shown that, when it came to such vital matters as having enough to eat, I was the superior? It was easy enough to collect dry grass and seaweed for a bed, but I thanked Poseidon with fervour for letting me discover an old fish spear in a tangle of wrack amongst the rocks. I sharpened it on a stone, and in one afternoon caught enough for 3 meals. To my credit, I did not laugh when Nigellus overbalanced and fell headlong into the sea, swallowing a lot of water before he came blowing like a triton to the surface. It would not have been unfair to laugh, for he had been convinced that using a trident must be easy, because I could do it so well. Maggie. Euripides in a fishing boat reached us on the 5th evening. Only when I saw it nearing shore did I realize how odd I looked. My tunic was torn and stained with seawater. I had forgotten to bring a comb with me, and a rock pool is not a reassuring mirror. Nigellus, after an effective attempt to share with his hunting knife, which I had blunted when opening mussels, was pitiable conscious of his stubble of beard. It's not easy to look noble in the remnants of a toga, but I think he would have managed to do so if only he had not developed a cold in the head. I felt very sympathetic, and yet a small part of me was ashamed, because he sniffed and found no comfort in telling myself that he would have remained healthy and in full dignity if only I had refrained from visiting my fish trap at midnight. We had caught a large lobster and 2 crabs. They had tasted good when roasted in hot ashes, but they were one of the luxuries which I could no longer afford. The fishing boat came alongside the natural quay of flat rock. Euripides was leaning over the side, smiling as though sure of his welcome. "Do I look hideous?" I asked Nigellus, and received a most comforting reply, proving again that I need not have feared that Romans were inarticulate. Euripides, with suitable expression of sympathy, which would have deceived anyone who knew him less well than I did, listened to the story of our mishaps. He said how fortunate it was that he had suffered nothing worse than a cold in the head, and that in future we must make due allowance for a certain mischievous trend in the minions of Poseidon. For myself it was unimportant, said Nigellus, but Lucina might have suffered grievously from exposure. She has been magnificent, and eaten the most unsuitable food as though she enjoyed it. Lucina is very hardy, said Euripides gravely. You must not be worried if she appears frail. Wait until she challenges you with a discus, and you will be surprised how strong she is. Personally, I think she looks charming with tangled hair, and the green smudge on her nose brings out the colour of her eyes. Lucina always looks charming, said Nigellus hotly. But of course, I intended the remark as a compliment of the highest order. Any woman can look beautiful with emeralds in her hair, or even roses. It takes Lucina to make do with seaweed. I smirked. As a smile, it was not convincing even to me, and I hoped Euripides was unaware how close I came to slapping him. So he thought that a few days on an island without benefit of unguents would cure me of my infatuation. Or worse, he thought it would cure Nigellus. It was a pity that Nigellus had a cold, but it could only make me feel more protective towards him. How could I change my mind at this stage and send him back to Julia? There was a momentary vision of how ridiculous Julia would look, combing the ashes of mourning from her hair, ordering the slaves to cease their wailing, wondering whether she could get back the funerary gifts. But of course I could not send him back to Julia. I had promised that to him in the grotto on the first night, and that promise was far more binding because it was not spoken in words. I was extremely angry with Euripides, but hidden in the back of my mind was a small regret that I could not laugh about the idyll with him. Dear Nigellus, Perhaps I should be able to teach him to laugh at himself. Or would it be unfair? I love her. Today is Friday!